A 6-year-old homeless girl, trembling in the cold night, thought no one would notice her as she curled up on the floor of a police officer's shed. Her dress was torn, her tiny hands clutching an old stuffed toy, the only remnant of a family she lost too soon. But the silence of that night was broken by the low growl of a German shepherd, a dog whose loyalty would uncover her secret and change her life forever. What followed was a journey from fear to safety, from loneliness to love, a story that will warm your heart and bring tears to your eyes. Before we begin, tell me, what city are you listening from right now? The town of Redwood Springs, Oregon, was the kind of place people described as quiet until winter came. Then it became something harsher. The wind carried needles of ice down from the Cascades, rattling window shutters and scouring the streets clean of voices. Main Street's neon signs sputtered and died early in the evening, leaving the town bathed in the yellow glow of a few street lamps and the silver wash of the moon. The world seemed deserted, wrapped in white silence. At the edge of town, beyond the last row of houses where farmland and timber pressed close, stood the modest home of Officer Daniel Harris. His property stretched back toward a line of pine trees, and in the yard, half buried by snow, crouched an old shed. Built by his father decades ago, it was a box of weathered planks, the tin roof patched where rust had chewed through, the door sagging on tired hinges. In summer, it smelled of grass clippings and gasoline. In winter, it was little more than a forgotten shelter for tools and dust. But tonight, it was more than that. Inside, curled on a heap of straw, lay Lily Parker, a girl of only 6 years. She had wandered too far and endured too much for someone so small. Her hair, tangled chestnut darkened by grime, clung to her cheeks where melted flakes had run down. Her cheeks were flushed with cold, her lips nearly blue. She wore a pink dress, once bright, now dulled and soiled, the hem jagged from catching on fences and pavement. The fabric was thin, soaked through, and it clung to her skin. Her knees, scraped and red, peeked from beneath the tattered skirt. On her feet were no shoes, just socks that had long since surrendered to holes. In her arms, Lily held a stuffed bear. It was nearly as battered as she was, fur worn thin. Stuffing shifted into strange lumps, one eye replaced by a black button. To anyone else, it would have looked like trash. To Lily, it was everything. She squeezed it against her chest the way a knight might grip a shield, whispering to it between breaths. The shed smelled of old oil and dry hay. The straw beneath her poked at her skin, but she didn't complain. Compared to the streets, compared to the alleys where she had tried and failed to sleep, this shed was a palace. It was 4 walls that blocked the wind. It was darkness that, for once, hid her instead of threatening her. Still, the cold sank in, her small body shivered violently. She rubbed her bare arms, tucking her legs up tighter, trying to make herself smaller. She closed her eyes and thought of warmth, not of fire or beds, for those memories were too far gone, but of sunlight, the kind that used to fall through her bedroom window before everything changed. She whispered to her bear, "We'll just sleep." Just one night above her, the boards creaked. The door shifted against the wind, opening a crack, closing again. A pale blade of moonlight cut across the straw. Dust hung in it, drifting like tiny ghosts. Lily watched them float and pretended they were stars. She counted them until her eyelids drooped. She didn't know how long she slept. Outside, the house glowed softly in one kitchen window. Inside, Daniel Harris moved with the careful rhythm of a man who lived alone. Daniel was 38, his frame tall and broad-shouldered from years of police work and manual labor before that. His face carried the wear of long days' dark hair flecked at the temples, a square jaw often shadowed by stubble, lines at the corners of his steel-blue eyes. He was not unkind, but he carried the weight of solitude. Years ago, he had lost both his parents. Afterward, he'd thrown himself into work, into serving Redwood Springs. People in town described him as fair but quiet, the kind of officer who listened more than he spoke. He had no family, no wife, no children. But he was not truly alone. At his side, wherever he walked, moved Rex. Rex was a German shepherd of 7 years, his coat a proud black and tan, his build muscular but lean. A faint scar curved above one eyebrow, giving his noble face a permanent look of skepticism. His eyes, deep amber, seemed always to calculate who to trust, what to guard, when to act. He had once been trained for K-9 work, but had been retired early after a minor injury. For Daniel, that didn't matter. Rex was still a guardian, still a partner, still family. That evening, Daniel had reheated leftover chili on the stove. The warm smell of cumin and tomato filled the small kitchen. He moved slowly, methodically, washing a plate, hanging his coat by the door, scratching Rex's ear as the dog sat by his boots. It was the routine of a man who found order in small tasks, but Rex was not at ease tonight. As Daniel sat with his bowl, Rex lifted his head, his ears pricked, his nose twitched, tasting something strange on the air, something faint but undeniable. He rose in one smooth motion, muscles taut beneath his fur. He padded to the back door, pressed his snout against the wood, and released a low, steady growl. Daniel frowned. "What is it, boy?" Rex looked back at him, eyes sharp, body rigid. Then he turned again to the door, nostrils flaring. There it was, straw, dirt, cold air, and something else, something human, small, fragile. In the shed, Lily stirred. She shifted in her nest of straw, half dreaming, half awake. She thought she heard footsteps crunching faintly on snow, then a sound that froze her heart, the low growl of a dog. Her eyes snapped open. Her small hands clutched the bear tighter. She had been chased by dogs before, strays in alleys with ribs showing, their teeth snapping. Fear coiled in her chest. Rex drew closer. The yard stretched silent beneath the moon as he padded toward the shed. Each step was deliberate, his paws pressing into the snow with the patience of a hunter and the caution of a guardian. His ears stood tall, his tail stiff, his body a line of purpose. He lowered his head as he neared the sagging door, inhaling deeply, confirming what he already knew. Inside, Lily held her breath. Her eyes darted to the gap in the door, where moonlight slipped through. Shadows shifted there. She could hear the faint creak of wood, the soft thud of paws in snow. She pressed back against the straw, wishing she could melt into it, become invisible. Rex stopped at the door. He listened, nose quivering. Behind the wood came the quick, uneven breaths of a child. He could sense fear, sharp, metallic, almost like blood in the air. He lowered his head further, ears twitching, then leaned closer. For a long second, there was silence. Lily stared at the crack of moonlight, her tiny chest rising and falling. Rex stood utterly still, the night holding its breath. And then, with the authority of a guardian and the certainty of instinct, Rex barked. It was not the frantic bark of alarm, nor the playful bark of invitation. It was deep, commanding, impossible to ignore. It was a call meant for one person, his master. The sound shattered the stillness of the night, echoing across the snowy yard, bouncing against the trees. Lily flinched, burying her face in the bear's matted fur. The straw rustled around her. Rex remained at the door, body tense, eyes locked on the darkness inside, waiting. He had found something. He had announced it. And now, whatever happened next, he would not leave. The shed, the girl, the dog, the story had begun. The sharp bark of Rex tore through the winter silence, and Daniel Harris knew it wasn't for nothing. Years of living beside that dog had taught him the difference. There were barks for raccoons, barks for passing cars, and then there were barks that carried weight, the kind that pulled him to his feet before thought could form. Daniel grabbed the flashlight from the counter, slid on his boots by the door, and shrugged into his thick patrol jacket. The jacket, navy with reflective strips, was worn at the elbows, its edges dulled from years of snow and rain. He stepped out into the night, the cold clamping down on his skin like a hand. Rex was already halfway across the yard, ears erect, body taut as a bowstring. Snow clung to his black and tan fur, dusting his back like ash on a fire. He glanced over his shoulder, giving his master that urgent look, then padded toward the shed again, nose quivering. Daniel followed, his boots crunching in the snow. His frame moved with the cautious authority of a man used to walking into dark places, ready for trouble but hoping for peace. His steel blue eyes narrowed against the wind, the beam of his flashlight cutting a clean path through the dark. "Easy, boy," he murmured, voice low. The shed loomed ahead, its wood warped, roof sagging under snow. The padlock dangled open, useless. Daniel frowned. His father had built that shed decades ago. It was supposed to be sturdy, but time had a way of wearing everything thin. He pressed one gloved hand against the door, felt the wood shiver under his touch, then nudged it open. The beam of his flashlight swept inside. At first he expected the reflective eyes of an animal, maybe a raccoon scavenging straw. But what the light revealed froze him where he stood. There, curled in a corner of the shed, was a child. She was tiny, no more than 6, her hair a tangled chestnut mess plastered to her cheeks. Her face was pale, streaked with grime, lips trembling violet. The pink dress she wore hung in tatters, smeared with dirt and stiff from dried mud. Her knees and arms bore scratches, fresh and old, little stories of falls and nights spent without protection. She held a stuffed bear close, its fur worn, one button eye catching the flashlight's beam. Her wide eyes locked on him, eyes too large for her thin face, eyes filled with both terror and something else. A fragile, desperate hope. Daniel's breath caught. The sight pierced something deep in him, something he hadn't felt in years. He had seen abandoned houses, broken families, accidents on the roadside. He had seen cruelty in forms that hardened him. But this was raw, unguarded need in its purest form. Before he could move, Rex padded forward. The German shepherd approached the child, not with aggression, but with solemn care. His nails clicked softly on the wooden floor of the shed. Lily shrank back at first, clutching the bear tighter, her tiny shoulders trembling. But Rex lowered himself, lying down beside her, eyes gentle, ears relaxed. He pressed his nose against her small hand, giving it a slow, deliberate nudge. The child gasped, a sound more startled than afraid. Her fingers twitched, then settled against the dog's warm fur. For the first time that night, her shoulders eased. Daniel watched, stunned. Rex had always been protective, but this was different. It was as if the dog understood before he did that this little girl needed guarding, not chasing. He stepped inside, the beam of his flashlight dropping to the straw. His boots crunched softly as he moved closer. The child flinched, pressing into the corner, her wide eyes darting between him and Rex. Daniel crouched down, lowering the flashlight so its glow softened. Up close, he could see her better. The dirt, the scratches, the hollowness of her cheeks. Yet there was strength in her gaze, even if fear trembled beneath it. "What are you doing out here?" he asked quietly, though he knew she wouldn't answer easily. His voice was rough, shaped by cold nights and police radios, but there was warmth beneath the grit. The girl didn't speak. She pressed her lips together and clutched the bear tighter, knuckles white. Daniel exhaled, leaning back on his heels. He didn't want to scare her more. Years of training had taught him how to interrogate, how to press for answers, but none of that felt right here. This wasn't a suspect. This was a child who looked like she had run out of world to stand in. Rex stayed pressed against her, his amber eyes flicking up at Daniel as if to say, "Don't push, just wait." For a long moment, they all sat in silence, broken only by the groan of the shed and the whine of wind outside. Daniel's mind spun. Protocol screamed at him to radio this in immediately. A found child, likely a runaway, possibly a case for child services. But another voice, quieter yet heavier, pressed inside his chest. The voice of something paternal, something protective he hadn't known still existed. He had never been married, never had children. Work had consumed him, filled the spaces that loss had hollowed out. But looking at the little girl, her frail body curled around that stuffed bear, Daniel felt something shift. He couldn't just treat this as paperwork. She glanced up at him again, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. For a fleeting second, he thought he saw her lips part, as if to speak. But no words came. Instead, she buried her face against Rex's fur. The German shepherd didn't move. He simply stayed there, breathing slowly, warmth radiating through his thick coat, a silent promise of safety. Daniel rubbed his jaw, the stubble scratching against his glove. He felt unprepared, unsteady. For the first time in a long while, he didn't know the right move. Report it and risk her being swept away by a system that often forgot names and faces, or bring her inside, just for tonight, and listen to the whisper of his heart telling him she belonged somewhere better. He closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of decision pressing on him. The storm outside rattled the shed door. Inside, the little girl clung to the dog, and Daniel Harris, a man who had built his life on rules and duty, realized that sometimes rules bent under the weight of compassion. He opened his eyes and looked at her again, not as a stranger, not as a problem to solve, but as a child he couldn't walk away from. The door to Daniel Harris's home groaned as he pushed it open, the rush of warmth inside wrapping around him, and the little girl who trailed hesitantly behind. The contrast was stark outside. The yard was still silvered in frost and silence. Inside, the hum of the furnace and the faint smell of wood smoke softened the air. Daniel removed his gloves and hung them on a hook by the door, motioning with a hand for Lily to follow. She didn't move right away. Her bare feet hovered at the threshold, eyes darting nervously around, as if crossing into the house might trigger some unseen trap. "Come on," Daniel said gently. His voice, though naturally rough and low, had softened. "It's warmer in here." The little girl stepped in slowly. Snow melted on the hem of her tattered pink dress, dripping onto the rug. She kept her stuffed bear clutched tightly against her chest, eyes wide, shoulders stiff. Rex padded in behind her, tail brushing the doorframe. He gave a quick shake, scattering melted snow from his thick coat, then trotted ahead, circling the living room as if to confirm it was safe. When satisfied, he sat at the hearth rug, amber eyes returning to Lily like a beacon. Daniel guided her toward the fireplace, a brick hearth with a cast-iron wood stove that glowed faintly red. He crouched, added 2 more logs, and adjusted the iron door so that the flames inside leapt higher, throwing amber light into the room. "Sit here," he said, patting the rug near the warmth. Lily lowered herself onto the spot, still hugging her bear. The firelight danced across her face, revealing more clearly the hollowness of her cheeks and the dirt streaks across her skin. Her hair, tangled and matted, glimmered faintly in shades of chestnut and bronze, where the light caught it. She sat very still, legs folded under her, as if too afraid to take up space. Daniel studied her a moment longer, then stood and moved into the adjoining kitchen. His house was modest, practical. Oak cabinets that had seen decades of use, a linoleum floor scuffed by boots, a refrigerator covered in faded magnets, one in the shape of a trout, another from the county fair. On the counter, an old enamel pot waited. He set it on the stove, filled it with broth, vegetables, and noodles, and lit the burner. The hiss of flame filled the silence. He wasn't a chef. His meals usually consisted of reheated chili or eggs and toast, but he knew how to make a simple soup hearty enough to chase away winter. As the pot began to steam, the smell of carrots, celery, and chicken filled the room, weaving its way into the living room where Lily sat. Rex settled at her feet, his head resting on his paws, his body stretched protectively across the rug. His presence seemed to anchor her. She occasionally glanced down at him, her fingers twitching as if she wanted to stroke his fur but wasn't sure if she was allowed. Daniel returned after a few minutes, carrying a steaming bowl in one hand and a spoon in the other. He set it on the table near the fire, the aroma rising in comforting waves. "Here," he said, sliding the chair out. "Eat while it's hot." Lily didn't move. Her eyes flicked to the bowl, then back to him. Her fingers tightened around the bear. Daniel hesitated, then crouched so they were eye level. Up close, he could see her eyes, hazel, wide, and ringed with shadows of exhaustion. "It's just soup," he said gently. "Nothing fancy. You're safe here." She swallowed hard, gaze dropping to the bowl again. Slowly, she climbed into the chair, still clutching her bear with one arm. She picked up the spoon with trembling fingers, but didn't bring it to her lips. Rex shifted beneath her chair, looking up with patient eyes. His ears tilted forward, his tail giving a soft thump against the floor. It was as though he was silently urging her on. Finally, Lily dipped the spoon into the broth, lifted it, and sipped. The warmth hit her tongue, spreading down her throat into her stomach, and something inside her cracked. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. She pressed the back of her hand to her face, embarrassed, but the tears came anyway, hot, unstoppable, sliding through the grime on her cheeks. Daniel watched quietly. He didn't reach out, didn't press her. He knew enough to let her have this moment. When she could speak, her voice came out small, almost broken. I haven't had food like this in a long time." Her words wavered, but they carried the weight of truth. She took another sip, then another, this time faster, as if afraid the bowl might vanish. She ate until the broth was nearly gone, then paused, looking guilty, as if she had taken too much. Daniel shook his head. There's more if you want it. She shook her head quickly, hugging the bear tighter. No, I don't need more. Need. Her eyes dropped to the table, but Daniel caught the flicker of longing she tried to hide. He didn't press. Instead, he refilled the fire, letting the silence stretch comfortably. After a long moment, Lily whispered, "My mom and dad, they're gone?" Her voice trembled, but she pressed on, as though the words had waited too long inside her. "They got sick. Then they didn't wake up. I went to live with my aunt, but she said she couldn't keep me. She told me to go. So, I left." She clutched the bear so tightly it seemed strained. Her eyes shimmered in the firelight. Daniel's chest tightened. He had seen tragedies in his line of work, but hearing it from the lips of a child stripped away all the protective layers. He thought of his own childhood parents who had worked hard but had always been there, who had built this very shed with their own hands. To imagine being cast out at 6 years old, it was unbearable. "You've been on your own?" he asked softly. Lily nodded, eyes fixed on the table. "I sleep wherever I can. Sometimes people give me food. Mostly, I just walk." The simplicity of her words made them more devastating. Rex nudged her leg with his nose. She blinked, startled, then looked down. The dog's amber eyes met hers, steady and kind. She reached out tentatively, fingers brushing his fur. When Rex didn't pull away, she stroked him once, then again. A faint smile ghosted across her lips, the first Daniel had seen. He leaned back, running a hand over his jaw. His mind churned. Protocol told him to call social services immediately. But his heart told him something else. This girl wasn't just another case. She was flesh and blood, fragile but fierce, and she had found her way into his shed as if fate itself had carried her there. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something stir inside him, an ache, but also a calling, a responsibility he hadn't asked for but couldn't deny. He looked at Lily again, at the way she now sat a little straighter by the fire, her hand resting lightly on Rex's back. Her eyes still carried fear, but there was a spark in them now, faint but alive. Daniel knew in that quiet moment that this wasn't chance. It was the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. The following night, Redwood Springs was silent under a blanket of snow. The town had a way of turning ghostly when the wind died down. Every house shuttered, every lamppost haloed in frost. Daniel Harris sat at his kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The steady crackle of the fire in the hearth was the only sound inside, along with the slow, even breathing of Lily Parker, asleep on the couch. She lay curled beneath an old wool blanket he had fetched from the linen closet, her small stuffed bear tucked into her arms. Her thin chest rose and fell in a rhythm that spoke of exhaustion rather than peace, as though even in dreams she hadn't fully left behind the hunger and fear of the streets. Rex was stretched out on the rug beneath her, his head resting on his paws, ears twitching at every creak of the house. Daniel's eyes kept drifting to the window. Something in his bones felt restless. Maybe it was habit 15 years on the force had trained him to listen for the things other people ignored. Or maybe it was the lingering weight of Lily's story, the way it gnawed at him like an old wound. Children left on their own always had shadows trailing them. A sudden growl broke the quiet. Rex's head shot up, amber eyes flashing toward the back of the house. His growl deepened, rumbling through his chest until it filled the room. Then came the bark sharp, guttural, insistent. Daniel set his cup down and rose to his feet in one fluid motion. His hand reached for the flashlight and his service pistol resting on the counter. He didn't draw the weapon yet, but the weight of it at his side grounded him. "Stay here," he muttered toward Lily, though she was still half asleep, stirring under the blanket. Rex bounded to the back door, claws clicking against the hardwood, barking now in a rhythm Daniel recognized. Intruder. Not a deer, not the wind. Someone was too close. Daniel pushed open the back door, the flashlight beam cutting through the icy night. The shed stood quiet, its snow-laden roof sagging. Beyond the fence, shadows draped the tree line. He swept the light left, then right. And their movement. A figure hunched near the fence, trying to blend into the dark. The man froze when the beam found him. His face, pale against the night, was narrow and sharp, with greasy hair plastered beneath a knit cap. His eyes, small and restless, darted like a rat's caught in a trap. Daniel's memory sparked. He knew that face. He had seen it in reports, whispered in complaints from kids he'd interviewed on the street. The man was called Earl Slim Hanley, mid-40s, wiry, with a permanent slouch that made him look like he was always ready to flee. He had a patchy beard, more stubble than hair, and his clothes hung off him in layers of stained jackets. Earl wasn't just a drifter, he was a parasite. Daniel remembered the case files. Earl had been suspected of running groups of homeless kids, like a business forcing them to beg, pickpocket, and bring back the scraps while he took the lion's share. But the evidence had always slipped through the cracks. The kids were too scared to testify. The law could only circle him, never land a blow. "Step away from the fence," Daniel barked, voice carrying across the yard. Earl squinted against the light, his thin lips curling into a mock grin. "Evening, officer," he said, his voice nasal and slick. "Didn't mean to bother your peace." Just passing through, Rex snarled, teeth bared, body rigid at the doorway. "Don't lie to me," Daniel growled. "What are you doing here?" But Earl didn't answer. He slipped back into the shadows, disappearing among the trees. The beam of light caught the edge of his boot before he vanished entirely. Daniel clenched his jaw. Behind him, a small voice quivered. "Who was that?" Lily had sat up on the couch, the blanket falling from her shoulders. Her face was pale, her hazel eyes wide with fright. She hugged her bear tighter, knuckles white. "No one who's going to hurt you," Daniel said firmly, though the words tasted like ash. Rex didn't calm down immediately. He stayed by the door, hackles raised, gaze locked on the tree line, as if daring the man to return. Only after long minutes did his body ease, though his ears stayed pricked. Daniel closed the door, locked it, and pulled the curtains tight. His mind spun with the implications. If Earl Hanley had come this close, he wasn't just passing by. He had seen Lily, and if he recognized her, she was in danger. That night, Daniel barely slept. He sat by the fire with Rex at his feet, watching the embers burn down while Lily drifted back into restless slumber on the couch. The question circled in his mind. How had Earl known? Was he searching for Lily? Or was it chance? Either way, he couldn't ignore it. By morning, the snow lay fresh again, covering tracks. But Daniel knew Earl's type. He wouldn't give up easily. That evening, his instincts proved right. Rex erupted once more, barking furiously at the back. This time, Daniel was ready. He clipped the leash to Rex's collar and led him into the snow. The shepherd pulled hard, nose to the ground, tracing the scent of boots along the fence line. They followed the trail past the edge of the property and into the woods. The beam of Daniel's flashlight bounced between tree trunks, catching the flash of fresh prints in the snow. Rex's body strained against the leash, eager, his breath puffing in clouds. A crack of a branch snapped ahead. Daniel tightened his grip. "Hold," he ordered. Rex froze, muscles taut but obedient. The light found Earl again, crouched near a fallen log, muttering curses as he tried to mask his tracks. But there was no escape now. Daniel's voice rang through the cold air. "Don't move, Hanley!" Earl bolted. Rex lunged forward, the leash snapping taut. Daniel released him with a single command. The shepherd surged ahead, bounding through snow, his growl reverberating through the woods. He cut off Earl's path, teeth bared in a ferocious snarl. Earl skidded, stumbled, and raised his hands. All right," he shouted, fear lacing his words. Daniel closed the distance, cuffs ready. His breath came hard, visible in the cold air, but his grip was steady as he snapped the metal around Earl's wrists. "You should have stayed in the shadows," Daniel muttered. Rex stood guard, chest heaving, eyes still locked on Earl until Daniel gave the signal to ease. By the time they returned to the house, Lily was waiting by the window, her small figure framed by the frost on the glass. Fear still lingered in her eyes, but when she saw Rex beside Daniel, her shoulders dropped with relief. The shepherd padded in first, tail wagging now, the danger gone. Lily ran to him, wrapping her arms around his thick neck. For the first time, her trembling had less to do with fear and more with the overwhelming rush of safety. Daniel shut the door behind him, the sound of the lock clicking home, carrying more meaning than usual. Tonight had proven it beyond question. This child was no longer alone. The morning after Earl Hanley's arrest, the air in Redwood Springs seemed lighter, as if the snow itself reflected relief. Yet inside Daniel Harris's modest home, The real shift wasn't in the weather, but in the little girl who now sat at his kitchen table. Lily Parker, 6 years old, still wore the same pink dress patched, frayed, stained with dirt that no washcloth could scrub away. But her eyes no longer carried only fear. There was something new there now, a flicker of safety, like a candle flame just beginning to burn steady. She hugged her stuffed bear close, watching Daniel with cautious interest as he moved about the kitchen. Rex sprawled on the floor near her chair, paws crossed, ears occasionally twitching. The German Shepherd seemed to have adopted the role of her silent guardian. Whenever Lily glanced down, his amber eyes met hers, steady and patient, as though reminding her she wasn't alone anymore. Daniel noticed all of it, and as he poured himself a cup of coffee, he realized he could no longer treat this like a temporary situation. A child could not live off borrowed nights and bowls of soup. She needed more clothing, education, a life not defined by hunger and hiding. "Lily," Daniel said, his voice soft but steady, "we're going into town today." Her eyes widened, spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "Town?" she echoed, the word heavy with uncertainty. He nodded. "You need something better to wear than that old dress." Her hands clutched the bear tighter. She didn't answer, but the slight wrinkle of her brow told him she didn't quite believe it yet. Main Street in Redwood Springs was quiet that morning, the shops opening one by one as frost still clung to the glass. The first stop was Maggie's Outfitters, a small clothing store run by Maggie Cooper, a woman in her 50s with a round figure and a personality as warm as her knitted scarves. Maggie's curly gray-streaked hair framed her face like a halo, and she wore half-moon spectacles that slid down her nose whenever she smiled. "Well, well," Maggie said, stepping out from behind the counter, "if it isn't Officer Harris. And who's this little darling?" Lily froze, half hidden behind Daniel's coat sleeve. Her small hands twisted in the fabric. Daniel cleared his throat. "This is Lily. She's staying with me for a while." Maggie's eyes softened instantly, her years of raising 3 children of her own giving her an instinct for reading between the lines. "Well, aren't you sweet?" she said gently, crouching so her gaze met Lily's. "We'll find you something warm and pretty, all right. Something that keeps the winter out." For a moment Lily didn't move. Then Rex, who had followed them inside and now sat calmly at her side, gave her a small nudge with his nose. Lily exhaled and gave the faintest nod. Together they sifted through racks of dresses and coats. Daniel, out of his depth, mostly stood by awkwardly, his broad frame looking comically out of place among frills and ribbons. Maggie, on the other hand, worked with cheerful determination, holding up sweaters against Lily's shoulders, fussing with sizes. Finally, Lily stepped out of the fitting room in a simple blue dress paired with a soft cardigan and new boots that clicked lightly on the wooden floor. She looked up at Daniel, uncertainty flickering in her eyes, as though asking silently, "Do I look right?" Daniel's throat tightened. "You look perfect," he said, voice gruffer than he intended. But Lily didn't let go of her old pink dress. She folded it carefully and tucked it into the small backpack Maggie gave her, as though it were a treasure rather than a rag. Daniel noticed but said nothing. He understood. Some things you carried, even when they no longer fit. A few days later, Daniel drove Lily to Redwood Springs Elementary School. The red brick building stood at the edge of town, its windows shining with frost as children in bright coats rushed about the playground. The sight made Lily's small hand grip Daniel's tighter. I don't think I can," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the laughing clusters of children. Daniel knelt so his eyes were level with hers. His square jaw softened, the lines at the corners of his eyes etched deep from years of strain. "You don't have to do everything today," he said. "Just one step at a time. I'll be here when the day ends, and Rex will be here too." As if on cue, Rex barked once, wagging his tail. That earned the smallest smile from Lily. They were greeted by Miss Caroline Foster, Lily's assigned teacher. Caroline was in her early 30s, tall and slender, with long auburn hair tied neatly into a bun. Her green eyes radiated warmth, though there was an alertness in her posture that revealed years of experience with children who needed more than books. She extended a hand to Lily. "Hello, sweetheart. I'm Miss Foster. We're so happy to have you in our class." Lily hesitated, then offered her hand, so small and fragile against Caroline's. Throughout the day, Lily sat quietly at her desk, her bear tucked into her backpack for comfort. She barely spoke, watching her classmates from a cautious distance. Yet every time she glanced toward the window, she saw Rex outside by the fence, lying down with his head on his paws, his tail wagging slowly. The dog refused to leave, his watchful eyes fixed on her classroom, and slowly that presence gave her courage. At recess, when two girls invited her to join their game of hopscotch, Lily almost declined. But one glance toward Rex, who lifted his head as if urging her on, made her step forward. She hopped awkwardly at first, her boots too new, her body too stiff. Then laughter bubbled out of her, light and unguarded. For the first time in months, she looked like a child again. Caroline Foster noticed. She stood by the playground gate, her arms folded, watching with quiet amazement as Lily giggled and skipped alongside the other children. Later, when Daniel returned to pick her up, Caroline pulled him aside. "Officer Harris," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been teaching here for almost a decade. I've seen children come from every kind of background, but I've never seen a child warm up as quickly as Lily. Whatever you're doing, it's working. She feels safe." Daniel glanced toward Lily, who was running to hug Rex, her hair catching the afternoon sun, her smile unguarded. He felt something shift inside him again, an anchoring certainty. He wasn't just sheltering her, he was changing her life, and she was changing his. The winter sun filtered weakly through the blinds of Daniel Harris's kitchen, casting long bars of pale light across the worn wooden floor. Lily Parker sat at the table, her small hands wrapped around a mug of hot cocoa, her hair brushed neatly into soft waves. She was humming faintly, a sound so light that Daniel, pouring coffee into his travel mug, almost didn't notice it. It struck him then, the difference. The little girl who had once hidden in his shed was now humming, smiling shyly, even daring to laugh when Rex nudged her arm for a scrap of toast. Change had taken root here, quiet but undeniable. But the knock at the door reminded him that not everyone was convinced. Daniel opened it to find Margaret Collins, a social worker from the county office. Margaret was in her late 40s, tall and angular, with a crown of salt and pepper hair pulled into a tight bun. Her gray suit was immaculate, though her eyes softened when they fell on Lily. Still, there was a practiced firmness in her voice. "Officer Harris," she said, stepping inside with a clipboard tucked against her side. "I've been assigned to evaluate the situation regarding Lily Parker." Daniel gestured for her to enter. Lily watched cautiously from her chair, her mug halfway to her lips. Rex stood immediately, tail stiff, body angled protectively between the girl and the stranger. "It's all right," Daniel said, resting a hand on the shepherd's back. "She's here to talk." Margaret crouched slightly, her knees cracking, and offered Lily a small smile. "Hello, sweetheart. I'm Margaret. I help children find safe homes." Lily didn't respond at first. She pressed closer to Rex, one hand tangled in his thick fur. But when Rex gave a low, reassuring whine, Lily whispered, "This is my home." The words landed heavy in the silence. That afternoon, Daniel sat across from Margaret at the table, Rex sprawled at his feet. Lily played quietly in the corner, with crayons Daniel had bought her, sketching crooked flowers on scrap paper. "Officer Harris," Margaret began, adjusting her glasses, "you've done something remarkable here. Lily looks healthier, happier than when she was found. But the question is whether you can provide this long term. You're a single man, in a dangerous profession, without prior experience as a guardian." Daniel's jaw tightened. "She doesn't need experience. She needs stability. She needs someone who won't turn her away." Margaret nodded slowly, making notes on her clipboard. "I don't doubt your sincerity. But sincerity isn't always enough." Daniel glanced toward Lily, who was now laughing softly as Rex pawed at one of her crayons. He lowered his voice. "She's been through hell. If you send her somewhere else now, you'll undo everything she's rebuilt." Margaret sighed, her expression softening despite her professional reserve. "That's what we're here to determine." Word spread quickly in Redwood Springs that social services was questioning Lily's place with Daniel. By the end of the week, support began pouring in from every corner. At Redwood Springs Elementary, Ms. Caroline Foster was one of the first to speak up. She drafted a letter on cream stationery, her elegant cursive looping across the page. "I have rarely seen a child transform so completely in such a short time. Lily's laughter now fills our classroom, and her eagerness to learn grows each day. This change is inseparable from the care of Officer Harris and the constant presence of his dog, Rex. She handed it to Daniel in the school hallway, her green eyes bright with determination. "You're not fighting this alone," she told him. Neighbors added their voices. Tom Walker, an older man who lived next door, came by one evening with a stack of signed petitions. Tom was a retired mechanic in his 60s, with weathered hands and a stoop in his shoulders. He had a gruff way of speaking, but his loyalty ran deep. "People around here see what's happening," Tom said, thrusting the papers into Daniel's hand. "That little girl's got life back in her eyes." "That's you. That's the mutt," he added with a nod at Rex. "No one's taking her away without a fight." Even at the police station, Daniel's colleagues spoke up. Sergeant Mike Dawson, his longtime partner, a broad man with a square face and peppered beard, stopped him in the locker room. "Look, Danny, I've seen you pull kids out of wrecks and crime scenes for years, but I've never seen you look the way you do when you talk about her. That girl belongs with you. If they need testimony, you've got mine." Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. The walls that had once held only silence and duty were now brimming with voices, neighbors, teachers, friends, all united by the simple truth of Lily's place in his life. The hearing with social services was informal but tense, held in a wood-paneled room at the county office. Margaret Collins sat at the head of the table, flanked by two other case officers, Janet Reyes, a younger woman with curly black hair and warm brown skin, and Peter Wallace, a balding man in his 50s whose frown seemed permanently etched into his features. They asked questions for over an hour. Could Daniel provide financial stability? How would he protect Lily given his job's risks? Did he understand the demands of raising a child? Daniel answered as best he could, his voice steady, but his heart pounding. He spoke of Lily's progress, of Rex's unwavering guardianship, of the support network growing around them. But the most powerful evidence wasn't words. When asked if she wanted to stay, Lily slid off her chair, crossed the room, and wrapped her arms around Rex's neck. Her voice trembled but carried clear across the chamber. "I laugh now. I sleep now. Because of them. Please don't make me leave." Janet's eyes glistened. Even Margaret's stern expression faltered. Peter only cleared his throat and looked down at his notes. That evening, Daniel returned home with Lily and Rex. The fight wasn't over. Paperwork and procedures still loomed. But for the first time, he felt hope that the tide had turned. Lily sat cross-legged on the rug, braiding Rex's fur into clumsy patterns, giggling when he shifted his ears in mock annoyance. Daniel stood at the window, watching the snow fall softly outside, and felt the weight of the day lift from his shoulders. Neighbors had spoken, teachers had testified. Even his fellow officers had stood behind him, and Lily herself had spoken words no bureaucracy could deny. This wasn't just a case file, it was a family. And Rex, ever watchful, ever loyal, was the silent proof of it all, his body never straying far from the little girl who had once shivered in a shed. The county courthouse of Redwood Springs stood like a solemn sentinel at the edge of Main Street. Built of pale stone with tall windows that glimmered in the winter sun, it had weathered decades of hearings, divorces, land disputes, trials. But on this day, in one of its smaller chambers, something far gentler was unfolding. Daniel Harris stood by the heavy oak doors, straightening the collar of his pressed navy suit. The cut of the jacket made his broad shoulders even more commanding, though his restless hands betrayed nerves he rarely let anyone see. He had faced armed suspects, violent nights, and the solitude of years, but nothing had ever made his stomach twist quite like this. Today wasn't about the law in the abstract. Today was about family. At his side, Lily Parker clutched his hand. The 6-year-old looked transformed. She wore a white dress, simple but elegant, its fabric crisp against her small frame. A ribbon of pale blue tied at her waist, its bow slightly crooked from her fidgeting. Her chestnut hair had been brushed until it gleamed, falling just past her shoulders, and her hazel eyes glowed with anticipation. Yet, even in this new finery, she held something old in her other hand, a small strip of faded pink cloth, torn from the dress she had once worn in the shed. It was her reminder of how far she had come, of where she had started. Rex sat proudly on her other side, his black and tan coat brushed until it shone, his ears perked, tail thumping lightly on the courthouse floor. At nearly 7 years old, the German Shepherd had grown into the perfect blend of strength and calm. His amber eyes scanned the hallway with vigilance. But when Lily rested her small hand on his head, he gave a low rumble of approval, leaning gently into her touch. The doors creaked open. A bailiff, a young man with sandy hair and a nervous smile, gestured them inside. "They're ready for you." The courtroom wasn't grand, but it carried a certain dignity. High-backed wooden chairs lined the walls, and the judge's bench loomed at the far end beneath the state seal of Oregon. Rows of polished pews stood mostly empty, save for a handful of familiar faces. Caroline Foster, Lily's teacher, had come, her auburn hair pinned neatly, a proud smile curving her lips. She wore a green wool dress, her posture tall, her hands clasped with quiet hope. Next to her sat Tom Walker, the retired mechanic from next door. His weathered face softened as he raised a hand in greeting, the lines of age deepened by the kindness in his gray eyes. He had traded his oil-stained coveralls for a clean jacket, though it still smelled faintly of machine grease. Behind them, Sergeant Mike Dawson filled nearly 2 seats with his broad shoulders. His peppered beard was trimmed, his uniform pressed. He caught Daniel's eye and gave a short nod, solid, dependable, the kind of support that spoke volumes without words. And at the front, presiding over it all, was Judge Evelyn Carter. In her early 60s, she was a woman of commanding presence, her silver hair cut sharply at her chin, her black robes draping with authority. Her pale skin bore fine lines etched from decades of measured decisions, but her blue-gray eyes held a surprising warmth. She was known for her fairness, but also for a streak of compassion that often threaded through her rulings. "Officer Harris," she said as they approached, her voice clear and steady, "and Miss Lily Parker. Please come forward." The proceedings began with formalities, the clerk reading through the petition for guardianship. The legal language washed over Daniel, but Lily's hand tightened around his with each new phrase. Petition to adopt, suitability of guardian, best interests of the child. Judge Carter turned her gaze toward Daniel. "Officer Harris, the record shows that you are a single man, employed in law enforcement with a demanding schedule. Do you believe you can provide the stability and care necessary for this child?" Daniel straightened. His steel blue eyes met hers. "Your Honor, I can't promise a life without challenges. My work is dangerous, but I can promise her safety. I can promise her a home where she is wanted, where she is loved, where she'll never again have to wonder if she belongs." The judge studied him for a long moment, then turned to Lily. Her voice softened. "Miss Parker, you've been through a great deal. Can you tell me, in your own words, what this home means to you?" Lily glanced up at Daniel, then down at Rex, who wagged his tail as if to encourage her. She took a shaky breath. "When I was outside, nobody wanted me. I was cold all the time. I was scared all the time. But then Officer Harris found me. And Rex. Rex never leaves me. Now I can sleep. I can laugh. I can go to school. I want to stay. Because this is my home." Her small voice trembled, but every syllable carried weight. Judge Carter's expression softened visibly. She nodded, then looked at Rex. "And what about you, young man?" she said with a hint of humor. The courtroom chuckled gently as Rex barked once, tail wagging. Lily giggled and hugged him tight. Witnesses spoke next. Caroline Foster described Lily's progress in school, the way she had gone from silent watchfulness to eager participation, the joy she now shared with her classmates. Tom Walker testified to the safety and warmth he had seen at Daniel's home, how Lily had transformed from a frightened shadow into a child with light in her eyes. Sergeant Dawson spoke of Daniel's integrity, of his unwavering dedication not only as a police officer, but as a man capable of loyalty and compassion. When it was done, silence filled the chamber. Judge Carter folded her hands and leaned forward. This court recognizes that family does not always arrive by blood, but sometimes by choice, by the deliberate, unwavering choice to love and protect. Her voice carried through the room, steady as stone. Therefore, it is the ruling of this court that Daniel Harris is hereby recognized as the legal adoptive father of Lily Parker. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then Lily let out a small cry, her eyes brimming with tears. She dropped the strip of pink fabric into her pocket and flung her arms around Daniel's waist. "Daddy," she whispered, voice breaking. "I have a home now." Daniel's throat tightened. He crouched, pulling her close, his arms wrapping around her tiny frame. His own voice was rough, but steady. "And I have a daughter now." Rex pressed against them both, tail wagging so hard it thudded against the bench. That evening, the three of them walked through Redwood Springs Park. The sky blazed with the colors of sunset burnt orange, rose, and violet streaking across the horizon. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the playground, and the snow glistened under the fading light. Lily skipped between Daniel and Rex, one hand gripping her father's, the other buried in Rex's fur. She laughed, clear and unburdened, her breath clouding in the cool air. Daniel glanced down at her, and for the first time in years, he felt the heavy weight he had carried lift fully from his shoulders. The past, the loneliness, the pain, the shed in the dark was closing. What lay ahead was something brighter, a future stitched together not by chance, but by choice. And as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the three of them walked on, a man, a child, and a loyal dog. Not fragments anymore, but a family. Sometimes miracles don't come with thunder or lightning. Sometimes God's miracle is a warm home, a child's laughter, and the loyalty of a dog who refuses to leave our side. Lily found her family not by blood, but by love. And in that, she reminds us all that God's greatest gift is belonging. If you believe that love can heal broken hearts and that God still sends us miracles in the quiet corners of our lives, share this story with someone who needs hope today. Leave your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more stories that uplift the soul, and may God bless you and your loved ones with peace, warmth, and a place to call home.